in the suffocating darkness before the great deluge, when giants walked the earth and angels fell from heaven to teach forbidden knowledge to the daughters of men, there existed texts so dangerous that religious authorities spent centuries trying to erase them from human memory. What terrified them was not mythology or primitive superstition, but something far more unsettling: a coherent system of antediluvian wisdom that challenged everything we thought we knew about human origins, divine rebellion, and the catastrophe that reset civilization. Chapter 1, The World That Drowned. Between the creation of Adam and the fury of the flood stretched 17 centuries of human existence that Orthodox scripture reduces to a handful of genealogies and cryptic verses. But the banned books of the Patriarchs tell a different story, one infinitely more complex and infinitely more disturbing. They describe a civilization that achieved heights of knowledge and depths of corruption that made its complete annihilation not just divine judgment, but cosmic necessity. The Book of Enoch, rejected from the biblical canon by 4th century church councils, yet preserved in its entirety by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, opens a window into this lost world. Enoch, the 7th patriarch from Adam, the man who walked with God and was taken up to heaven without tasting death, becomes our guide to the catastrophe. This is testimony about a breakdown in the cosmic order itself, a rebellion that began in heaven and infected the earth so thoroughly that only total destruction could cleanse it. The text begins with a haunting premise. 200 angels, called Watchers, stationed on Mount Hermon to observe humanity, instead descended to take human wives and teach forbidden arts. Their leader, Semjaza, makes them all swear an oath, binding themselves together in their transgression because he fears that he alone will bear the punishment for this cosmic crime. They descend, they take wives from among the daughters of men, and from these unions are born the Nephilim, giants whose appetites and violence would eventually consume the earth. But the real corruption was not biological, it was intellectual. The fallen angels, according to Enoch, taught humanity knowledge that heaven had not sanctioned. Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields, the arts of war and metallurgy. He taught women cosmetics and precious stones, the arts of enhancement and deception. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting, the manipulation of nature through occult means. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokobel taught the constellations. This was not random information. This was systematic instruction in the sciences and arts that allow civilization to rise, but also to corrupt itself. Metallurgy enables agriculture and construction, but also weapons of war. Astrology and astronomy allow navigation and calendars, but also divination and attempts to manipulate fate. Root cutting, the knowledge of plants and their properties, enables medicine, but also poisons and mind-altering substances. The Book of Jubilees, another rejected text that claims to record revelations given to Moses on Mount Sinai, adds crucial details. It explains that even before the Watchers descended, humans had already begun to fall into wickedness. The knowledge taught by the angels accelerated and intensified corruption that was already underway. What emerges from these accounts is a picture of antediluvian civilization as technologically sophisticated but morally bankrupt. The Nephilim, offspring of angels and humans, grew to enormous size and strength. Their appetites were insatiable. The Book of Enoch records that they consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when mankind could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against humans, devouring them and drinking their blood. The earth groaned under their violence, the sky wept at their blasphemies. Enoch himself, before his final translation into heaven, was given a mission. He was to pronounce judgment upon the Watchers, to inform them that there would be no peace for them, that they would watch their giant children destroy each other before the earth itself was cleansed by water. The picture that emerges is of a world divided against itself. On one side, the progeny of the Watchers and their human accomplices, building a civilization of violence and occult power. On the other side, a faithful remnant, the line of Seth, through Enoch to Noah, preserving knowledge of the true God and the ethical order he had established. Chapter 2, The Secrets They Taught. The banned books of the Patriarchs are obsessed with cataloging exactly what knowledge the fallen angels imparted to humanity. This is not incidental detail. The texts treat the transmission of forbidden wisdom as the central crime of the antediluvian age, more dangerous even than the sexual transgression of angels taking human wives. Why? Because knowledge, once given, cannot be taken back. A child born of an unnatural union will die. But an idea, a technique, a craft, these can propagate endlessly through human culture. The Book of Enoch provides the most systematic account. It names specific angels and their specific teachings, creating a taxonomy of forbidden knowledge. Azazel, whose name means strength of God, stands out as the primary corrupter. His teaching of metallurgy and weaponry represents the fundamental technology that allows humans to dominate and destroy each other on scale. Before metal weapons, human violence was limited by human strength. After metal weapons, the strong could multiply their advantage and the organized could overwhelm the numerous. But Azazel's teaching of cosmetics and ornamentation to women is equally condemned. Why should makeup and jewelry be treated as forbidden knowledge on par with weapons of war? The text suggests that these arts enable deception, allow humans to present themselves as other than they are. In a world where appearance and reality align, trust is possible. In a world where cosmetics and jewelry create false appearances, every interaction becomes potentially deceptive. Samjaza's teaching of enchantments and root cutting opens another dimension. This is pharmacology, botany, chemistry. The knowledge of which plants heal and which kill, which induce visions and which induce sleep. This knowledge is morally neutral in itself. The same plant that provides medicine can provide poison. The text recognizes that such knowledge inevitably will be used for both purposes. But it focuses on the evil applications because in the antediluvian world, evil had become dominant. The astronomical teachings of multiple angels represent something different. This is cosmological knowledge, understanding of the heavens and their movements. Such knowledge enables calendars, navigation, agriculture, but it also enables astrology, the belief that human destiny is written in the stars, that the movement of celestial bodies determines earthly events. This represents a philosophical corruption, a shift from seeing humans as free moral agents responsible to God to seeing them as puppets of cosmic forces. The Book of Jubilees adds a crucial element. It claims that before the flood, humans lived much longer lives, commonly reaching 800 or 900 years. This longevity meant that knowledge could accumulate in ways impossible in our current age. A craftsman could perfect his art over centuries. A philosopher could develop systems of thought through millennia of reflection. A corrupt individual could spread wickedness across generations directly, never dying to allow their poison to be forgotten. This raises a disturbing possibility. What if antediluvian humanity was not primitive, but advanced? What if the flood destroyed not a simple agricultural society, but a sophisticated civilization whose achievements we have never recovered? The banned books hint at this repeatedly. They describe the Nephilim building great cities, creating works that astounded even their angelic fathers. Noah becomes crucial here. Noah was not just a righteous man. He was a repository of preserved wisdom. The Book of Jubilees records that Noah's grandfather, Methuselah, and his father Lamech specifically instructed him in the righteous traditions of the pre-flood world. They taught him which knowledge was from God and which was from the fallen angels. They prepared him not just to survive the flood physically, but to preserve uncorrupted wisdom through the catastrophe. The texts hint that Noah brought more than animals onto the ark. He brought knowledge. He brought seeds of plants that had existed before the flood. He brought understanding of crafts and sciences that developed in righteous lines. But he also had to make choices. The text suggests that Noah deliberately allowed certain types of knowledge to perish in the flood. The most dangerous teachings of the Watchers, the most corrupting techniques, the knowledge that had enabled the Nephilim to terrorize the earth. This he did not preserve. Chapter 3. The Testimony of Enoch. Enoch occupies a unique position among the patriarchs. While others lived long lives and died, Enoch walked with God and was taken directly into heaven at 365 years old, a symbolic number representing the solar year. This translation makes Enoch the only human before the flood to escape death. But more importantly, it makes him the only human to return from heaven with direct knowledge of divine mysteries. The book of Enoch claims to record his testimony about what he saw and learned during his heavenly journeys. This is not metaphorical language. The text presents itself as Enoch's first-person account of traveling through different levels of heaven, observing the dwelling places of angels, witnessing the imprisoned fallen watchers, and receiving revelations about past, present, and future. Enoch describes being taken by angels to the ends of the earth, to the places where heaven and earth meet. He sees the foundations of the world, the storehouses of the winds, the reservoirs of hail and snow, the channels through which the lightning passes. He observes the mechanisms by which the sun and moon move through their courses, the gates through which they enter and exit the sky. He is taken to see the place prepared for the punishment of the fallen watchers. He describes a terrible valley filled with fire, where the rebel angels are bound in chains of darkness, awaiting final judgment. They plead with Enoch to petition God on their behalf, to intercede for mercy. Enoch agrees, but when he presents their petition to the divine throne, he is told there will be no forgiveness. The watchers made their choice, with full knowledge of the consequences. Enoch sees the future as well as the past. He is shown visions of what will come after the flood, how Noah's descendants will spread across the earth, how nations will rise and fall, how knowledge will again accumulate and again corrupt. He sees ages stretching forward to a final judgment when heaven and earth will be renewed. But perhaps the most disturbing element of Enoch's testimony concerns the nature of the Nephilim and their fate. According to the text, when the giants died, whether killed by each other or destroyed in the flood, their spirits did not go to Sheol like the spirits of normal humans. Because they were hybrid beings, part angel and part human, they had no proper place in the afterlife. Instead, they became demons, evil spirits that wandered the earth seeking to inhabit and corrupt humans. This explains the origin of demonic activity in the post-flood world. This concept had enormous influence on early Christian demonology. It explained why evil spiritual forces remained active after the flood had destroyed physical wickedness. The corruption of the pre-flood world did not die with that world. It transformed and persisted. Enoch's account of the fallen angels includes specific names and hierarchies. Semjaza led 200 watchers. The text lists their names: Arakiba, Ramiel, Kokabeel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros, Batariel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapil, Sadarel, Torel, Jomjael, Sariel. These are not random demon names invented for dramatic effect. Each name has meaning in Hebrew or Aramaic, often related to the specific knowledge or function associated with that angel. Enoch also receives ethical instruction during his heavenly journey. He is taught about righteousness and wickedness, about the consequences of choices, about the ultimate accountability all humans face. This teaching is remarkably sophisticated. It does not present morality as arbitrary divine commands, but as alignment with the structure of reality itself. Righteousness is living according to the created order. Wickedness is rebellion against that order. The testimony of Enoch concludes with him returning to earth for a time to warn humanity about coming judgment and to instruct his descendants in righteousness. The text presents his writings as preserved through Methuselah and Lamech to Noah, making them part of the knowledge that survived the flood. Chapter 4. Why they banned it. The exclusion of the patriarchal books from the biblical canon was not a simple historical accident. It was a deliberate theological and political decision made over centuries by religious authorities who found these texts increasingly problematic. Understanding why they were banned reveals as much about the development of Orthodox Christianity and Judaism as it does about the texts themselves. The earliest evidence shows that books like Enoch were widely accepted and quoted by Jewish communities in the Second Temple period. The Dead Sea Scrolls discovered at Qumran included multiple copies of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, demonstrating their importance to at least one major Jewish sect. Early Christian writings, including the New Testament Epistle of Jude, explicitly quote Enoch as prophetic scripture. But by the 4th century, attitudes were changing. Jerome, translating the Bible into Latin, excluded Enoch from his Vulgate edition. Augustine expressed doubts about its authenticity, suggesting its antiquity made it impossible to verify. The councils that formalized the biblical canon did not include the patriarchal books in their approved lists. Why the shift? Several factors converged. First, questions arose about the text's origins. Unlike the books attributed to Moses or the prophets, which had clear chains of transmission within Israelite tradition, the patriarchal books seem to appear suddenly in the Second Temple period. Were they truly ancient texts preserved from before the flood? Or were they recent compositions attributed to ancient figures to give them authority? Second, theological problems emerged. The detailed angelology and demonology of Enoch, with its elaborate hierarchies and specific names, seemed to invite speculation and even invocation of spiritual beings. Early Christian leaders worried about believers attempting to contact or command angels and demons using knowledge from these texts. Third, the text's explanation of evil's origin through angelic rebellion and hybrid offspring conflicted with emerging theological frameworks. Church fathers were developing sophisticated arguments about original sin, human free will, and divine providence. The patriarchal books, with their emphasis on external corruption from fallen angels rather than internal human fallenness, complicated these arguments. Fourth, apocalyptic elements in these texts became politically dangerous. The Roman Empire, which Christianity was increasingly accommodating itself to, did not appreciate writings that spoke of empires falling and divine judgment destroying the wicked rulers of the world. The patriarchal books' vivid descriptions of cosmic warfare and coming catastrophe could inspire revolutionary movements. Fifth, the text's treatment of knowledge itself was problematic. They presented certain types of learning as inherently corrupting, forbidden by divine decree. But Christianity was becoming an intellectual tradition, engaging with Greek philosophy, developing theological systems. How could the church condemn knowledge-seeking when it was itself engaged in exactly that? The exclusion was not universal or immediate. Ethiopian Christianity preserved Enoch as canonical scripture to this day. The Ethiopian Orthodox Bible includes the Book of Enoch and treats it as divinely inspired. This demonstrates that the canonical decisions made by Latin and Greek Christianity were not inevitable or universally accepted. But in the Western Church, the patriarchal books were progressively marginalized. They moved from scripture to apocrypha to complete obscurity. By the medieval period, most Western Christians were unaware these texts had ever existed. The knowledge they preserved, the warnings they contained, the cosmology they described, all of this was lost to mainstream religious consciousness. The irony is profound. Books warning about forbidden knowledge became themselves forbidden knowledge. Texts describing the corruption that made the flood necessary were themselves flooded out of religious memory. Warnings about the dangers of losing track of divine truth were lost precisely because religious authorities decided they were too dangerous to preserve. What was lost? A cosmology that took seriously the reality of spiritual warfare and the ongoing influence of rebellious forces. An explanation of evil that acknowledged both human responsibility and cosmic corruption. A warning that knowledge without wisdom leads to destruction. An understanding that civilizational collapse has happened before and can happen again. The texts raise questions that remain uncomfortable. What if human history is cyclical rather than progressive? What if we are not the first civilization to develop advanced technology and complex social organization? What if previous humanity rose high and fell hard, leaving only fragments of memory that we dismiss as mythology? So the books were banned, not because they were obviously false, but because they were dangerously destabilizing. Not because they lacked ancient pedigree, but because their antiquity made them impossible to control. Not because they contradicted Scripture, but because they expanded Scripture in directions religious authorities could not manage. Yet knowledge, as the books themselves teach, cannot be permanently suppressed. The texts survived in Ethiopia. They were rediscovered in the modern period. They are now available to anyone who seeks them. The forbidden has become accessible. The banned has returned. And the questions they raise about our origins, our nature, and our future remain as urgent as ever. Perhaps that is the real reason they were banned. Not because they were false, but because they were true. in ways that truth was not supposed to be told.